see red and blue lines on the battle map, you see lines. I see hundreds of thousands of scared young men fighting, anxious, not knowing if they're going to be alive or not. And that's what interests me. So for 7 years I did these little vignettes, 360 of them all told. And then the National Geographic Society 2 years ago made a nationwide announcement that it would do one book for the sesquicentennial, the 150th anniversary of the war, in which we are now. And one of the high-ranking officers in National Geographic used to listen to my radio broadcast. And he said, all right, if we're going to do one book, I've got just the subject, out at Virginia Tech named Robertson, who does a weekly radio broadcast. Let's see if we can get those broadcasts. And to fast forward it, they selected 132, and here it is.
Oh, wonderful.
The thing is just absolutely beautifully done on the National Geographic to put together artwork like this. Nobody was prepared for what happened. The first printing lasted 4 days, 50,000 copies. By the time they got the second printing out, the second printing had to fill in all the time span that the first printing was to be. And by the time that happened, it was out of print again. It went out of print right after Thanksgiving. Fortunately, it came back right after Christmas. And we're off and running with this thing now. And the book is it's just selling like hotcakes. And in answer to the question why, because it's human. It just talks about people and little things that happened during the war. It appeals to emotion. And if any of you ever had me in class, and if you have, God, I'm a whole lot older than I think I am. If any of you ever had me in class, you heard me say 100 times, unless you understand the emotions of the Civil War, you'll never understand the war. It was a war in which emotions were not in control. It was a war in which America lost, for the moment, the one thing and the only thing that holds us together, a spirit of compromise. That's what brought America into being. That's what's held it together. That's what we're about to lose right now. I'm a Civil War historian. I sit and I hear these politicians saying, I'm not compromising, I'm not going to bend on this issue. To me, those people are talking treason, because they're talking about destroying the one thing that can hold us all together. And this is what bothers me completely. But people were very young back then. Half the population in America in 1861 was under the age of 21. We were kids. They were naive and youthful and innocent, etc. My God, I've taught them for 50 years in that age group. And I know how college students are. They think in extremes. Think for yourself. You don't have to make a public confession. Just think for yourself in your college days. Everything you do is extreme. An entree of one meal like beef or chicken. It's 132 little hors d'oeuvres. Each one runs a page with illustrations. And you can just sit and read it all day long. And I want to share a little bit of it with you tonight, just the kind of things that are in there. The first of the 6 different chapters. The first deal, the 2 brothers came together. They were found on the same field dying of wounds. And soldiers brought them together. They held hands. After all those years of estrangement, they were going to be together at the end. The most popular of the broadcasts I ever did is in here. It's a story of little Sally. And if you like animals, I do, it appeals to you. Little Sally was a little terrier given to the 11th Pennsylvania when it went off to war. And she became an integral part of the regiment. She always was with the colors. She was the first up in the morning, the last to go to bed at night. She marched beside the men. She fought in battles with them. Wherever the 11th Pennsylvania went, Sally went with them. They lost her at Gettysburg. They couldn't find her. And 3 days later, burial details discovered Sally. She was keeping guard over 3 members of the 11th Pennsylvania who'd been killed. And she wouldn't let anybody come close to them. On February 2nd, 1865, the 11th Pennsylvania made an attack at Hatch's Run, which is near Petersburg, Virginia. Little Sally was killed, shot in the head in the battle. And 2 Pennsylvania soldiers, totally oblivious to the bullets flying through the air, dropped their muskets, dug a grave with their hands, and they buried little Sally on the Petersburg battlefield. But as Paul Harvey used to say, that's not the end of the story. In 1890, the 11th Pennsylvania put up a monument at Gettysburg, a regimental monument, and it looks like all the other 2,000 monuments at Gettysburg. It's a tall marble obelisk, and on the top of it is a bronze figure of a defiant soldier. But if you look closely at that monument, you'll see down at the bottom a ledge. And on that ledge is a little bronze statue of Sally. And you get up close to it and her eyes are open. She seems asleep, but she is guarding forever the men with whom she shared an undying love. The National Geographic does wonders. Photography was 20 years old at the time of the Civil War. 20 years old. And yet somehow, somewhere, for some reason, somebody took a picture of Sally, and it's in the book. The chances of that are 1 in a million, but it's in the book. On this, and the most emotional thing I can show you are 2 photographs. One of Lincoln in 1861, and the other of him in 1865. And you will see in that picture a man aged 50 years. You will swear he is 50 years older in picture 2 than he was in picture 1. He's only 4 years old. And the one thing that kept him going was a sense of humor. Lincoln was always cracking jokes. Humor was his lifeblood. Humor was his escape from the cold realities of time. Once he was chastised for telling an earthy joke. And Lincoln immediately grew serious and said, "I'll laugh because I must not weep. That's all. That's all." And yet here is a man who went through the war and became our first martyred president. Lincoln loved self-deprecating jokes. He liked to tell jokes on himself. He was, as a young man, he once said, he was chopping wood when he looked up and there was a fellow on horseback pointing a gun at him. And Lincoln said, "What's the matter?" And the guy said, "When I left home this moment, I swore I'd shoot the first man who was uglier than I am." Lincoln looked at him for a moment and he said, "If I'm uglier than you are, blaze away." 44 years was a long time. There were moments I'll never forget, 2 classes I can never forget. One was the Monday after the massacre, and when I had to go into class and face 300 students, tell them why 32 of their fellows were no longer there and what they needed to do. And of course the second was Wednesday, May the 5th, 2011, my last day. I had a class of about 350 and the hall holds 500. It was packed. Mamas and daddies whom I had taught came to be with their students that I was teaching, and it was a very emotional day for everybody concerned. But I didn't graduate from Virginia Tech, but I proudly wear, thanks to Betty and thanks to the class of 2011, I wear Tech Lincoln. And it's one of my proudest possessions, other than that $6,000. All right, so we've got a long trip back, but I just kind of bounced around the issues tonight. Let me answer any questions you may have. The Civil War is so big, you can't cover it all in a 30-minute talk off the head, all from a bad text, but I'm sure there's some of you out there.